And finally, what should become of church art once the creator of that work has been found guilty of heinous crimes? Art is now at the center of the scandal involving disgraced former Jesuit Marko Rupnik. To discuss, we're joined by art historian and author of How Catholic Art Saved the Faith, Dr. Elizabeth Lev. Liz, thanks for being here. I've been wanting to talk to you about this subject for a while. I know it's the age-old argument about art versus artist. In this case, the artist is a disgraced Jesuit priest who's been found guilty of horrific sexual abuse of religious sisters, possibly men. Do the misdeeds of an artist, whether a painter or a musician or a filmmaker, ever warrant the removal or suppression of his art?
Well, I think it's a difficult question, and it's one that it really takes a moment to stop and think about. So we have a very famous artist who was indeed convicted for murder, who of course is Caravaggio. We have a rapist artist who is Agostino Tassi. We have John Lorenzo Bernini, who in the middle of an adulterous affair had his mistress's face slashed. So we've had artists who have been condemned either in the court of public opinion or actually condemned in the case of Caravaggio, and their art still sits on the walls. Now, the question we have really here at the heart of the Marko Rupnik question is that indeed he has not been found guilty at the end of a trial or due process or an investigation. As a matter of fact, he still wanders about making art, taking commissions. And I think part of what we need to stop and think about is it that our inability to see the man brought to justice, to see justice for his victims, are we in turn taking it out on the art?
Well, Liz, he was excommunicated, and he has been removed from his order. They didn't do that for nothing. They only did it because there was enough evidence there. I know the trial hasn't proceeded fully, but that's other people's fault. But those things are underway. So there is some evidence that the man did something horrible, and he's been removed from his order and sent packing as a result. I know he's still wandering around, and the excommunication has apparently been lifted, which is another problem. Yes. But look, yes, there are widespread calls from the public to remove RUPNIK'S mosaics from the front of the Basilica in Lourdes, for instance. The bishop says he will make a decision soon about whether that art should be removed or not. Your thoughts?
I hope that the bishop stops and thinks about it. I do think we have to be careful with the Rupnik story. He was excommunicated, and then that excommunicated was lifted. He was expelled from his order, not for the crimes he committed against those women, but for lack of obedience. We really have never seen this man brought to task for the horrific abuse that we have read about in the version of the victims. And so again, the problem becomes, are we going to go after the art when the man instead of the man? And the problem with that, Raymond, this is what I'm very concerned about. This is a kind of damnatio memoria. This is cancel culture. So by putting the story off, removing the art so we don't have to look at it before, we will never have to confront the responsibility of all the people who lionized the man, held up his art as the most beautiful, important art, made him the logo for the Jubilee year. And that attraction of his art will never be explored. It will never stop another Rupnik from coming to the fore.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Look, the first order here is the justice of those victims that they are crying out for. That should be the first obligation of the church. But, I mean, I have to say, from an aesthetic viewpoint, this might be a great opportunity to get rid of some horribly ugly, in my estimation, and banal mosaics. I mean, this looks like I drew crap like this, Liz, when I was like 8 years old. I mean, they're stick figures. This is not Caravaggio. We can't confuse the two. Now, look, he's also a former priest, Liz, and this is very important. Father Rupnik wasn't just some artist. He wasn't Caravaggio. He wasn't, one of these other miscreant, passionate artists who kill somebody in the moment. That wasn't what we're dealing with. He's a Catholic priest who was an artist, and he abused these religious sisters, or it's certainly alleged that he did under his care. He deformed. That deformed spirituality is the wellspring of what I would consider this deformed work that is now all over the world. Doesn't the fact that he's a priest making liturgical works, not any works, for churches, isn't that a huge difference in this argument and the way it should be considered?
I agree entirely, first of all, about the art, which I have never been fond of. And even more importantly is the question of the scandal that is given by the fact that he is a cleric. I can think of an example of Fra Filippo Lippi, who was put in charge of a convent
Ah,
of women. And that's how we got Filipino Lippi, and an enormous scandal and a lot of fallout from that.
mm,
And yet his art still sits in churches. And so while the figure is while the figure of the cleric is extremely scandalous, I think one thing we need to remember is that this man, who is incarnated in a new diocese, he was incarnated in a new diocese.
right.
This man being able to offer sacraments, I find it much more disturbing that this man's hands can be on a chalice than on
Yeah,
pieces of mosaic. I find that the
yeah.
fact that he still can continue and be at an altar is the most disturbing than what he puts up above the altar.
Well, particularly what he's alleged to have done with a chalice and one of his victims, which I can't even repeat on the air, Liz. It's so vile and filthy. But because he's both defaming an individual and defiling a sacrament. But Rupnik's art is prominently displayed, nonetheless, as you mentioned earlier, all over the world. It's in
Absolutely.
Lourdes. It's at Padre Pio's tomb in San Giovanni Rotondo. It's at the John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., which I walked in the room. I was scandalized to see that horrible thing there long before I knew who he was or who made it. This is certainly not Caravaggio or Michelangelo, and his proximity to power, which you mentioned earlier, and the Vatican gave him access to these international canvases. It seems to me justice should be served first by asking the question, who were his patrons? Who forced him, if you will, on these churches? Because this is church art.
I think you're moving in on what I think is the concern for me. The fact is that his art did go up in these churches everywhere. He has been patronized by every pontificate. He was a very, very powerful
Mhm.
player. And there is a part in understanding how could it be that we didn't, whether our taste in art suddenly sort of shifted the minute we found out that this guy was a monster. But up until that point,
Right.
oh, Rubnik, I remember when he was chosen for the logo, and I called up and said, "What is wrong with you people?" And the answer I got was, "Rupnik, he's so hot right now." So the fact of the matter is,
Mm,
we do really need to explore. I do think taking down the art and creating our own version of cancel culture does not allow us to explore what it is that we saw in that art. Was it merely the fact that he was endorsed by John Paul II, or that we saw his works
yes.
in these other important sites? Or was there something that we're responding to it? I'll just give you a little note about Caravaggio. When
Yeah.
Caravaggio was in Rome and he was hated by enemies and he was a very violent man who was constantly fighting, one of his
Yes.
biographers said he was dark, his art was dark, and it was a reflection of his dark soul. But actually, the dark and
Yes.
light in Caravaggio was Caravaggio fighting this dark side and trying to work between it. And I think it would be a
Right.
mistake to not allow art historians 200 years down the line to try to have a crack at the arc of Marko Rupnik to understand what was going on and what is clearly a tormented soul.
Liz, you've studied many of these works. You've seen these Rupnik uh, mosaics, pardon the expression, in the flesh. They are sought after, at least by select clerics, and we should make this point. It is clerics who are the primary buyers here, okay? And it was clerics who were recommending that this art be propagated. Um, are people out of line asking for a reappraisal of this work? I mean, I guess my perspective is if this were a film by some director or an Andy Warhol, I wouldn't care what their personal lives were. But we're talking about a disgraced, disgusting Jesuit making art supposedly to focus us on the worship of God, and it's on altars, it's in front of basilicas. It's a different type of art, yes?
I do, but I think part of what made his art attractive, you're right. I have been looking at his art since I was in the Mater Redemptoris chapel while he was
Hmm.
making it. No, I'm not a model. And the fact is that in in those works, I've been trying to understand for years and long before this scandal hit. And one of the things that I found, and one of the things I began to understand is the simplicity of his art, which you put very well. I could make this as I was if I was when I was a child. But I think there's
Right.
something about his art, that very simplistic art, that really spoke to a world that was very simplistic in its understanding of art. So in many ways, what this also is a call to be more responsible about understanding what it is we're putting in front of us. Now, in many ways, that art, its simplicity, its bright colors, the painstaking meticulousness it takes to put together a mosaic was easy and approachable for people to understand. And it made the background of a church sort of shiny and colorful. And so we need to kind of look at this and give it time, give a generation that's not responding to the immediate knee-jerk horror of the scandal, but people who can
Hmm.
look at it with a greater sense of distance, so that we don't just sweep him under the rug, pretend like it never happened, and never take the responsibility of lionizing this man.
Rupnik's mosaics, I mean, they've even been criticized by some as being satanic, at least some of the elements featured in them. Do you see any of that in those works?
I
And does that aspect of his misdeeds, at least, color the work that he's created?
I'm very glad that you brought that up. I've been very troubled by this sort of constant pointing and satanic. Now, clearly, when these women talk about their truly horrific experiences, they talk about a
Terrible.
satanic experience. Whether or not that can be translated into a work of art is another question. So, my first question is, could somebody please show me another work of art that's satanic? Could you put in front of me a work that's clearly like a work of art that's not, with the image of the devil, that is clearly that satanic encoded? Show me where the satanic is. Because for everything that people might be able to interpret, the dark eyes, the fluid lines, I can think of other reasons why he might choose to make those choices artistically. So I'm very uncomfortable with this sort of pointing at the work and saying that's satanic, because once we head down that road, then we look at something else and, well, that's satanic and that's satanic and that's satanic. And the next thing we know, we are just as immersed and bought into the cancel culture of our age as anybody knocking down statues from here to the Mason-Dixon line.
No, I get your point. I get your point, and I am on in agreement with you that we shouldn't be tearing down works of art. But this thing is so offensive visually. See, I don't think it should have been put up, Liz. That's the other point. It's so
No
flippin'
argument
ugly.
here.
This is not Caravaggio. Caravaggio, you could look at that and you're inspired and uplifted. I know it came from a dark place. I've read his biography, and you feel that and see it. You and I know filmmakers who have come from the same tortured place, and yet they create inspirational works. I'm all for that. But this guy's work is neither. The work itself, I think, is not meritorious. It's ugly. It has very little aesthetic beauty or power in it, I think. But on top of that, when you look at the biography and you hear from these victims, it just breaks your heart. I mean, the abuse in the art, I think, at a point, it does speak to who created it. And that's why I think you see people and bishops and others wrestling with, what do we do with this stuff? It's all over our churches. It's a constant reminder of him, his victims, and his venality. I'll give you the quick last word.
I see your point entirely. I just have this. I feel like it should be a decision for the future to take. A little note about bad
Mm.
and problematic art: it disappears. So the fact of the matter is,
Yeah,
there are plenty of people during the course of the history of art who have created truly offensive works, and they're sitting in churches. I can think of a mural that was recently painted in
yeah.
a church in southern Italy, but that work fades in the distance. And one day the time comes and people tear it down because it has no meaning to it. And what I think we should
Yeah.
let happen is allow the work not to take the place of the man, but allow the work to fall on its own merits, or lack of such, in the
Mm.
future.
I wish people had read your books and been more attentive to the history of beautiful Catholic art. They might not have put this simplistic junk up in the first place. But we'll leave it there. Thank you for the spirited discussion. How Catholic Art
Thanks.
Saved the Faith by Dr. Elizabeth Lev is available at bookstores everywhere and online, including EWTN's catalog. Thank you, Liz.